Good morning, everybody. The collective West is escalating the conflict in Ukraine again, with Germany now agreeing to allow export licenses for 12 different countries to send their Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. Now, what's happened over the course of the last year is that there's been a lot of talk of escalating the conflict. And then the West, the collective West, NATO started to send weapons, armored vehicles, and then HIMARS missile systems, and then Patriot missile systems. And now the latest thing is tanks, and modern tanks with heavy armor and laser guided systems, which the old tanks the Ukrainians have at the moment that don't have that heavy armor. So they're not very good. Ukraine's got a lot of old tanks from the Soviet era, but they're not very good in this modern conflict. So they want 300 much more modern tanks to continue the conflict in their country. So Rishi Sunak said that he was going to send 12 Challenger tanks from the UK, which is completely ridiculous because the UK only has 227 tanks in total. I mean, that's far less than you would imagine. By sending 12 of them to Ukraine, the UK now only has 215 tanks in total. If anything actually happens that we need tanks to defend the country for any reason in the future, they're going to get blown out, within a week or so. It's just ridiculous to run your own military capability down for this conflict, which really is a long way away and doesn't have any bearing on what happens in this country, or shouldn't do. But there's been a lot of pressure on Germany to send Leopard 2 tanks, which are manufactured in Germany. And a lot of other countries like Poland and Finland said they would send these tanks to Ukraine, but they need an export license from Germany to do that because they got them originally from Germany. They're manufactured there, given to Poland, or Poland bought them, and they want to give them to Ukraine. So they need Germany's permission to do that. And they finally buckled under the pressure from the Zelensky regime. There was a meeting of 54 countries in Ramstein air base on Friday, where there was a lot of pressure put onto the German government to allow export licenses for these tanks. And then you had Boris Johnson appearing again. He sort of crawled up out of the grave, political grave, and appeared in Kiev with Zelensky. And then he said there, well, what is his words? It was reported, this is the moment to double down and to give the Ukrainians all the tools they need. He's talking about to win the conflict, whatever that means. So huge pressure on Germany to send tanks and to grant export licenses for other countries to send tanks. So now that's going to happen. So they've given licenses for 139 tanks to be sent to Ukraine, modern tanks with armor plating, full armor plating, and laser guided rangefinder systems. And America's going to send tanks, France is going to send tanks, the UK is sending tanks, everyone's sending tanks to Ukraine at the moment. So this obviously is an escalation. But then on the other side, some people are still trying to claim, oh, we're not directly involved in the conflict. Well, of course you are. This is NATO acting now. It's not direct war, but it's clearly is. They are, this is not an obvious proxy war now. They can't even pretend that they're not involved, but they still try to pretend that they're not involved. It's absolutely ridiculous. Of course they are. And of course the Russians see it that way as well. So this needs de-escalation. It's absolutely insane to be carrying on like this. But the thing is, what you get reported in the Western mainstream media is that the Ukrainian forces are being victorious. They've taken over a lot of lands back in the Kharkov area, in the Kherson area. They've pushed the Russian forces back. And Russia allowed that to happen. They withdrew their army very, very quickly when they saw these were areas that they couldn't defend because they were sparsely defended. So they pulled back behind a front line that they could defend much, much more easily, and saved their soldiers rather than fighting on to keep those territories, but then losing tens of thousands of men. What's happening now is the key strategic city of Bakhmut, which the Russian forces, the Wagner group, have been plugging away at for 6 months with very little actual advance in territory, very just slow, methodical advance in territory. Now they're encircling that city or town after 6 months of plugging away at trying to capture it, and they're at the point where Bakhmut is about to fall. And when it does, that's a key strategic city. It's the most heavily defended city or town in the whole of Ukraine at the moment. The Zelensky regime has been pouring soldiers and armored vehicles and the tanks it has, the artillery into defending Bakhmut, but it's still slowly being lost and encircled. But while they've been doing that, the front lines in other parts of the country have been weakened because they've been sending and pouring soldiers and arms into Bakhmut. So now Russians are starting to advance again in other areas near Zaporozhye and in the north near Siversk. If you look at the military summary channel, you'll see the maps of all this and they explain it very, very well. So Bakhmut is about to fall after 6 months. It might take another month, it might take 2 weeks, whatever. What are the people in the NATO, the Western countries, collective West, are thinking? Well, they're going to send tanks now to Bakhmut, and then that's going to help Ukraine to hold it for another 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and then maybe they'll turn the tide again. But that's not going to happen because it's just a terrible tragedy, more than a tragedy, because Zelensky, the regime, has admitted that over 150,000 young Ukrainian men have been sent to the front lines and have died in the front lines. This could all have been avoided if people had just stuck to the Minsk agreements or sat down and negotiated last February to avoid this conflict and stopped attacking the Russian areas in the Donbass as they've been doing for 8 years. This could all have been avoided. So all the people in the collective West who have talked this up and have escalated the situation when they should have been de-escalating are responsible in some way for the loss, the huge loss of lives, mostly young Ukrainian men, which is absolutely awful. So, again, I'll call for de-escalation. Don't send these tanks, and then they're talking about sending F-16s, American aircraft, fighters, later on. So they'll send the tanks. This is the latest escalation. The next thing down the line is to send F-16s and to try to say they're going to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. That's another obvious step towards a full-blown war between NATO and Russia, which no sane person wants to get into. But they're going in that direction. Why? It's absolutely insane. So we need to de-escalate. But it's obvious. I call for this. It's obvious it's not going to happen with the governments that we've got in place now. You have, the Germans are umming and ahhing. They can see that it's not the right thing to do. That they've delayed and they've dragged their feet, but ultimately they caved in to the pressure from, I guess, the big boys in the American deep state, the Victoria Nulands and so on, and Anthony Blinkens and people like that, who are all the neocons who want to escalate the war. Why? One, because they have a visceral hatred of Russia, and two, because the military-industrial complex that manufactures modern weapons is going to make billions and billions and billions of pounds of profits from manufacturing arms and sending it to Ukraine. Who pays for that in the end? Well, ordinary people pay for that, who have got nothing to do with this conflict, with money, and then the poor young Ukrainian men, mostly, pay for it with their lives. So we need to remove these people democratically, if we can, and get to a place where we are not pursuing these endless conflicts all over the world. Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, now Ukraine. Where next? I mean, this is 20 years of continuous war all around the world in different places, has been pursued by people in power in Western nations. And obviously in the UK, it doesn't make any difference whether you have Labour, Tory. You've got other parties that are totally supportive of these wars. Reform UK is calling for escalation. Lib Dems and the Greens, they support the conflict being carried on. So it's only the Heritage Party here we got in the UK that will de-escalate the situation, because we have a heuristic of not getting involved in third-party conflicts which don't affect our national interests. So something like the Falklands, yes, obviously we send troops and ships to the Falklands because that's British and it needs to be defended from an invasion. But all these other things, Syria, Ukraine, Libya, got nothing to do with us, and we shouldn't get involved in those situations. So if you are concerned about it like I am, please do join me in the Heritage Party, heritageparty.org. We're going to be standing candidates in local elections. We're going to be standing candidates in the Westminster elections, in the next general election when it comes up. And this is just one of many, many issues where all the parties are in lockstep together and going in the wrong direction. So we need to get into power and turn things around so we go in the right direction again, and we stop the wars and stop the killings.